On June 24, 1941, during a desperate struggle to defend Raseiniai in Lithuania from mass German origins, one Soviet KV2 tank crew decided to stop and change the situation. While the Soviet troops retreated en masse, the KV2 tank courageously held back the enemy until it arrived so importantly for reinforcements. A valiant full complement held back the advance of the entire 6th Panzer Division, defending the only road the Germans could advance along and continue their invasion as part of Operation Barbarossa. The lone KV2 tank fought to the last man outnumbered and armed, but when the battle finally ended, the unthinkable happened. After annexing Austria, Czechoslovakia, and finally Poland, Britain and France decided to go to war to prevent Germany from becoming a world power again. While this is being treated, Adolf Hitler signed a secret peace treaty with Stalin. Both countries took over half of Poland, and they turned their attention to their Western counterparts. Nevertheless, their army increased production and began to concentrate on the borders of the USSR. Then, on June 22, 1941, the invasion of history began, and more than 4 million Axis soldiers entered the Soviet Union across a front of more than 2,500 kilometers. In the early days of the offensive, the Blitzkrieg forces steadily advanced, pushing back the Soviet troops without any resistance. I'm sure the Germans will reach Moscow in a few days. However, the Soviet troops began to slowly regroup, and after the supposed concussion, quickly reorganized with tens of thousands of new recruits. Although the German Army Group North broke through the Soviet defenses without any problems, possession of the Lithuanian city, the goal was to take control of the strict river crossings in Lithuania that visited the Neman and Dubisa rivers in the area of Kaunas and the village of Raseiniai. Then more than 250 qualified tanks from Kampfgruppen Ross and von Seckendorf, which were part of the 4th Panzer Group of the 6th Panzer Division, began to make their way through the city, capturing their targets. However, they were confused by the new enemy, which they did not know about. The tank of Clement Voroshilov II, also known as the KV2, had such thick armor that no German tanks or anti-tank requirements of the time could penetrate it. Unfortunately for the impatient German infantry, they learned this the hard way. Tank KV2 Clement Voroshilov. When the Germans first saw the KV2 tank in action, they knew very little about this secret Soviet vehicle. The heavy tank KV2 was developed a few months before the start of the Soviet-Finnish War. The tank was 6.67 meters high, 3.35 meters wide, and 3.25 meters high. It also weighed 52 tons and was flown by a crew of 6 and had a top speed of 28 kilometers per hour and a range of about 200 kilometers. However, this kept depending on the version. Its main application called for M10 152mm howitzers with 20 rounds and 2 DP-27 machine guns with over 2,000 rounds of ammunition. The main innovation of the KV2 was its armor, which proved to be immune to the 3.7 centimeters KWG-36 and 7.5 centimeters KWG-37 hardness of the Panzer IE and IV. The KV2 also proved invincible against the most persistent anti-tank weapons, forcing the infantry to resort to flanking tactics to effectively destroy their rear or direct fire from 8.8 centimeters anti-aircraft guns. The mass machine was first used during the Winter War against the Finns, where the slow and clumsy metal beasts of the KV2 slowly approached the Mannerheim line, being completely exposed to fire, infecting the prisoners of war with superiority. However, in the end, the Finns discovered a way to destroy them by launching grenades, Molotov cocktails, and even set them in satchel charges. Despite significant armor, the tanks were not invincible. The last battle in Raseiniai, when a formation of 250 35T tanks collided with armored columns of more than 750 Soviet KV2 tanks on June 22, the ground shook. The Germans could not meet their 3.7 centimeters KWG-34 needs, barely scratching the armor of the KV2 meeting. Worse, the entire Soviet motorized defense force will attack the German garrison in an unstoppable, furious wave. Although the Soviets attacked the German forces after their flanking maneuver failed, they quickly passed through the infantry and artillery formations thanks to their French armor. Suddenly, a fierce close battle ensued between the infantry, tanks, and artillery pieces. The Germans quickly regrouped, closed ranks, and began to attack from afar in order to prevent new losses from the powerful KV2 guns. However, the Soviet tanks did the most damage they could before running out of ammunition, and when they did, they just went up to the German anti-tank guns and crushed them. Only then did the German troops begin to take possession of the field. As the Soviets ran for cover from the guns, the German infantry crept up behind and planted sticky bombs on the tanks' tracks to immobilize and destroy them. The 6th Panzer Division lost about 200 men, 30 tanks, and 40 motorcycles, but managed to push back the surviving KV2 tanks. In the late afternoon, Kampfgruppe Seckendorf received reinforcements, and Kampfgruppe Ross forces eliminated the remnants of Soviet resistance. Confrontation. On the night of June 23, local residents watched as a lone and battered KV2 tank drove onto the main road and stood in the middle to prevent other vehicles from passing. It was a country road along which the Germans were supplied. During the 5-day battle, the tank did not move anymore, and witnesses even believed that the crew ran out of fuel, left the tank at night, and forgot about it. Then, on June 24, a column of Soviet prisoners and wounded German soldiers approached the road and watched from afar a lone KV2 tank. The vanguard thought he was left there to rot, but then something strange happened. One of the front drivers watched in awe as the tank's turret slowly turned, and then stopped to aim at them. He blinked, puzzled, and a moment later a whistling sound pierced the air near the convoy. The Germans quickly turned around and returned to their base to ask for more tanks to destroy the KV2, but it was too late. An hour later, a column of 12 trucks with fuel and ammunition was utterly destroyed by a lone KV2 standing in the middle of the road. Traffic jams quickly formed on both sides of the road. The offensive slowly stopped a Soviet tank burning under the scorching sun. Colonel Erhard Ross quickly dispatched troops to destroy the tank, and a battery of 4 50mm anti-tank guns fired 7 rounds at the KV2. However, nothing happened. The turret then slowly turned around, aimed at the German crews, and fired. The KV2 remained in place, and an 88mm paper was then brought in to destroy it from 700 meters. While the crew was preparing the gun, the tank was silent, and then fired one accurate shot, destroying the gun. Colonel Reuth later recalled, "It turned out that the crew and the tank commander had iron nerves. They coolly watched the approach of the anti-aircraft gun, without interfering with it, since as long as the gun was moving, it did not pose a threat to the tank. Then came a critical moment in the duel of nerves, when the crew began to prepare the anti-aircraft gun for firing. It's time for the tank crew to act. While the gunners, terribly nervous, aimed and loaded the gun, the tank turned the turret and fired first. The KV2 then destroyed 2 other 20mm anti-aircraft guns that they had brought with them, and Colonel Reuth decided to send sappers with dynamite to get rid of them. However, we had to wait until the morning." Meanwhile, as the sun went down, another infantry attack with explosives failed. But when morning came, Colonel Reuth mobilized a column of tanks to distract the tank, and infantry with explosives came up behind to get closer. While the KV2 was trying to take aim at the enemy tanks, the timid infantry rushed to the vehicle and threw grenades at the armor-piercing holes to finish off the crew. They then ran for cover, and soon the tank exploded. When inspecting the tank, the Germans found the remains of 6 people. Colonel Reuth and his men were so impressed by the bravery of the crew that they decided to bury them with full military honors. The remains were then transferred to the Raseiniai cemetery in 1965. The names of the 6 road warriors are still unknown.